All right, so James, we got Peter Baker here, and he's written an article about this so-called landslide. And I think we got to look at two things here real quick, and I'd love your input.
Right.
So it's like a 1.5 race.
Right.
The blue wall states were all around 1 percentage points. This was a tie. It broke to Donald Trump by 1%, 1.5% in those three states where Democratic senators won in 2 of the 3 states. And yet Donald Trump picked up in 48 or 49 out of 50 states. You look at where the country went, just about everywhere. It was more conservative this year than it was 4 years ago. So I almost feel like saying, like when I said, well, it was close to being a tie, that almost tells Democrats, hey, everything's fine. You don't have to worry about it. No. Democrats lost ground everywhere. So what 2-3 weeks later, when everybody's had a deep breath, what's your thought on what happened? What lessons Democrats should take from it?
Well, first of all, I read Peter's article, and it was typically quite good. And while it is true to say this was not a landslide, it's also true to say Democrats were off by 6 points. I think we won by something like 4.5 in the popular vote, and we lost by 1.5 or whatever it is. But it was a troubling election for Democrats. And I think, and I don't think Peter's suggestion is the worst thing we could do and say, well, we just lost by a little bit. Let's just continue going the way we're going. No, we don't do that. And fortunately, my most optimistic thing about the Democratic Party is there's just so much potential talent in it. And I hope that whoever these people are, they get out and start running in 2028, right after the 26 midterms. But two things shouldn't be true at the same time. It was not a landslide, but it was a very troubling election for Democrats.
Well, and let's highlight a couple of the troubling things. Texas is a state that Democrats have been making great gains in. Barack Obama, I think in 12, may have lost it by 13, 14 points. It got closer in 16, got closer. What was it, down to 5, 6 points?
5 or 6, yeah.
5 or 6 points in 20, and now it's up to 14. And Florida looks like it's lost forever. You look at that map and you just start asking the question, where can Democrats pick up Senate seats in 2026? And I can't find a whole lot of places outside of North Carolina and Maine.
Well, let's start. Back in March, I said that I thought Democratic campaign culture had, quote, too many preachy females, unquote. Well, they all had a conniption. Have you looked at the mail vote that we got in November? You know, no one since November has come up and said a thing to me. Primarily, we have a large problem with males. And I'm not just talking about white males like you and I'm talking about males all across. And we need to address that. And we don't need to be shouted down by Washington liberal advocacy groups at NPR. We got to say we got a male problem and we need to get to work on it. And I think we can. Our campaign was, Joe Biden didn't give Harris much operating room. I'd be a little bit defensive of them. But for God's sakes, when you're asked the question, what would you do different from a president who 2/3 of people don't think doing anything right, have an answer. Do me a favor. Come up with an answer. And I think that was very harmful. But, we lost ground. We lost a lot of ground with males. And we don't need to sweep these things under the rug. We need to expose them and talk about them and discuss them.
Peter, when we look at your article and a feeling of a lot of experts that it was not a landslide, clearly wasn't. Is this, are we running the risk, let me put it that way, of Democrats relaxing, saying, well, we didn't get beat by that bad? Or should they be, as Carville is saying, looking at whatever it was, if it's under 2%, how do we make up that 4%? Who were we not talking to? Were we not talking enough about the lunchbox issues? Were we not talking about what groceries cost enough? Were we not talking about people's concerns that would have not hurt their base because their base is concerned about those issues too? We buy groceries too in the black community or Latino community. So which way do you think Democrats are going to read that they were close, but they shouldn't relax because they could have won?
Yeah, I think you make a lot of good points there. And just to be clear, the article wasn't meant to say the Democrats didn't have anything to worry about, right? The Democrats have plenty to think about at that election, no question about it. They couldn't beat a guy who'd been convicted of 34 felonies, who's found liable for sexual abuse, who's found liable for business fraud, whose company was found guilty in a criminal conviction of tax cheating. They couldn't beat a guy who tried to steal the last election when he lost. They couldn't beat a guy who plays to issues of race and sex and orientation and so forth. So that's a real weakness for Democrats if you can't beat a guy who is as flawed as Donald Trump is, at least in the traditional sense of politics. Now, the traditional sense of politics doesn't seem to apply to Trump, and he obviously has a connection to a large, significant part of the population that Democrats haven't figured out how to unlock. So absolutely no question about that. Just to be clear, my article is really more about going forward, about how Trump is trying to spin a 1.5 or 1.6% margin as if it was a landslide, which, of course, is not true. It's one of the smallest margins of victory since the 19th century. But in his interest, it's in his interest to claim that he is this great landslide winner as if he was somehow Reagan or LBJ or somebody like that, because then it gives him more influence. It makes him more powerful in Washington, allows him to sort of, pressure Congress to follow his lead on appointments or on legislation. So that's why he's going around using the word landslide, even though no historian who's looked at it, of course, would call it that.
All right, Peter Baker, thank you so much. Greatly appreciate it. And I will tell you, historians are going to look back at Joe Biden's presidency and look at him over playing his hand, perhaps trying to be the next FDR when we had a pretty close race there. And it's always a danger to overread your, quote, mandate, even when it's not a mandate. And Doris, you are the perfect person to ask about this, and I'm going to take you to your historical spot that you know the best. This is Rick Perlstein from Before the Storm. I just want to read the preface really quickly. Barry Goldwater had gone down to a devastating defeat in November. And most observers, the matter stood. The American right had been rendered a political footnote, perhaps for good. Reston of the Times. He has wrecked his party for a long time to come and is not even likely to control the wreckage. The New Yorker. The election has finished the Goldwater School of Political Reaction. By every test we have, declared James McGregor Burns, one of the nation's most esteemed scholars of the presidency. This is surely a liberal epic of the late 19th century, was a conservative one. And he goes on to say that many people said the two-party system itself finished. Now, Goldwater's landslide was a massive landslide, and yet 2 years later, the Reagan Revolution begins in California. And I mean, just let's talk about, you can find one election after another where the overplaying one's hand leads to a massive backlash.
And you know what's really interesting, Joe, is that LBJ won by 15 million votes, right? He could say to Mr. Trump, that's a real landslide. But he knew right from the start that that wasn't going to last. He took his staff together, the White House staff, and he said, OK, I won by 15 million votes. 2 million of those were just because they didn't like Goldwater. So they're not really mine. I'm going to have a fight with Congress soon. I'll lose another 2 million. I'm going to have a fight with the press, another 2 million. And then, almost anticipating, he said, and I might have to send boys to foreign lands. So you get your asses off the ground and get that program through as soon as it can. Now, the incredible thing that happened is in 1965, he got almost all the Great Society through. He got Medicare and Medicaid, civil rights, voting rights, aid to education, immigration reform, NPR, PBS, National Foundation of the Arts. And then that summer, just before the Congress came to a close, he escalated the war in Vietnam. And that would begin the beginning of the end of all of that momentum, which showed up in the '66 election. But just as you also said, the Republicans picked themselves up by the feet, or however you pick yourself up. They went out and they had a conservative think tanks. They figured out where are we going. Ronald Reagan wins that election in 1966, and then by 1968, the Democrats are out of the Congress, so and out of the presidency. So you're absolutely right. We have these rhythms in the United States. They go up and down. So you can't have too much arrogance, which the Republicans might have. You can't have too much, oh no, what did we do wrong? And we've got to figure out, just move forward for the Democrats and have confidence that this was not one of those elections that was a realigning election. election. That's what Peter Baker's article shows. And I think that's really important, because it's not a matter of philosophy that has to be changed. It's a matter of approach, I think, and how you deal with listening to the people who are hurting in this society. So history helps us in this regard, I think, to take ourselves not too seriously and just move forward, as everybody's saying.
Exactly. And I will say, the remarkable thing about LBJ in 64 and 65, when he did what he did in 65, he wasn't, quote, overplaying his hand. He knew, and he said that he had probably lost the South for Democrats for a generation. He did it anyway. And that, as Robert Frost would say, has made all the difference. Pulitzer Prize-winning author and presidential historian Doris Kearns Goodwin, thank you so much. Jonathan O'Meara. So Democrats are trying to figure out, what do we do? And you're almost like, okay, yeah, you know, you lost by 1.5 percentage points. You lost these 3 states by 1.5 percentage points. You don't want to overreact, and yet they've got such a massive problem in Middle America. It is deep red and getting deeper by the day.
It is, and some of the demographic and economic trends are working against them. We've talked on the show a lot about how some of the top strategists in the Democratic Party, they felt like this might have been the last election where Pennsylvania was a true swing state, right? Because it's starting to look like Ohio, and it's going to go redder and redder. So, yes, the margin here, not that big, but there are long-term significant consequences, James Carville. So let's go to you here for some advice, I guess, to your party. What should their approach be right now in terms of looking at these next 2 years ahead of the midterms? How much should they be looking, when appropriate, to work across the aisle with this president? How much should it be about pure resistance?
Well, thank you. And I'll go back to something that my friend Reverend Al said. In this campaign, there were 2 things that we could have run on that we didn't. One was raising minimum wage to $15 an hour. It passed in Missouri by 10 points. I know we were for it, but we didn't talk about it. The other thing we should have run on is raising taxes on incomes above $400,000 in a very serious way, and talking about giving young people, taking this money and putting it in mortgage relief funds so young people can buy a house, which they decidedly cannot do. You know, this thing is going to obviously fall under its own weight. They're already having an altercation down there at Mar-a-Lago. Everybody's got tattoos. This looks like a redneck board punch-a-two with a fist flying and hitting tattoos left and right, and I think this is going to continue. So we gotta come up with our own way to dig ourselves out of this hole. But I am kind of for a little economic populism here, and make the point America needs a raise. Let's give America a raise. What's wrong with that?
Give America a raise. Now, that's a great bumper sticker. And I will say it's probably a better bumper sticker than everybody's got a tattoo. So we're going to stick with give America a raise. James Carville, as always, thank you so much. Go Tigers.
Thank you, guys. Appreciate it.
The documentary, Carville, Winning is Everything Stupid, is available to stream now on Max. It's incredible.